and then we'll continue and pick up with our Gemara. The Year of Learning by Dr. Paul Koningsberg in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Levish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nissen Hara Nissen ben Fardosa. Ed, Paul and Bob Bromberg in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malcolm Mann in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust, Rav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bet Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Rav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Saratova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gidler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, shall assure her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva, Marsha Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel ben Harav Shimon. Month of Learning by Charlie Gelfenstein, in memory of his mother, Dacia Gilbat Meir Halevi, and his father, Meir ben Yaakov, Gila and Harold Saltzman, in memory of her mother, Eti bat Yitzchak Elchanan, Chaim and Phyllis Reese, in memory of his father, Mordechai ben Yom Tov Lipa. A week of learning by the Friends of Pauline and Gerald Feldman, in memory of their friend Gerald Feldman, Tzvi Hirschman, Menachem Mendel. Today, the 19th, a day of learning and plus Torah Fund, sponsored by Marsha Federbush, in memory of her father, Menachem Mendel ben Shlomo. That's it. May the Neshamas have an aliyah, Crank Rafia, Velta Shir, Shema Tliya, and L'chol B'nai Israel, a good gebenched yar. Okay. Let us go on. Okay. We said that we're starting with the Mishnah on Kaf Bet Amud Aleph, right? 102a in Art Scroll. We don't have a diagram per se, but it's similar to the discussion of the previous Mishnah, where we talked about the door there that drags on the ground. Okay, here we're talking about a bolt or again, there we talked also the bolt had a head on it, a nut, if you will. Okay, here this also bolt drags on the ground. Okay, so the fact that it drags on the ground is attached to a cord, okay, implying that it reaches to the ground, and ideally on Shabbat one would pull up the cord in order to be able to put it into the door to lock the door. Now, says the Mishnah, Neger Hanigrar. We have this bolt that drags on the ground, okay? And ideally it's Yisur D'Rabbanan situation, okay? No Alim Bo B'Mikdash, okay? Since it's only a Rabbanan, okay, one can lock doors in the Beit HaMikdash. We just started, Erwin, okay, on 102a with the Mishnah. Since it's an aspect of Shvut, and Shvut doesn't apply in the Beit HaMikdash, the Mishnah tells us that it is permitted to lock doors in the temple precinct. Aval lo b'Medina, but not within the general countryside. V'hamunach, says the Mishnah, and if the bolt is resting on the ground, okay, let's assume that it is not attached with a cord whatsoever. Kan v'kan asur, both here and here, namely in the temple precinct and in the countryside, it is forbidden to lock with it on Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he disagrees, Rabbi Yehuda, and says, Hamunach mutar b'mikdash, that if it's just lying there on the floor, okay, it is permitted to be used in the temple precinct. V'hanegrera, and the one that sort of drags on the ground, b'medina, that could be utilized in the countryside. Okay, so we just finished the Mishnah on Kaf Bet Amud Aleph that tells us that this bolt that in somehow is used to lock a door. Some want to explain that it's more like a cross beam that's lifted up and put into the door. But I think if we think of it more like, again, like we saw before, okay, that gives us a better sense of the issue. Now our Gemara wants to clarify. Tanu Rabbanan, says a Braita, Ezehu negar nigrar, sheno alin b'mikdash, aval lo b'medina. What kind of a bolt is this? Okay, that we seem to be permitted, that while it drags on the ground, okay, that we can lock doors in the temple precinct, but not in the countryside. Says the answer to the Braita, continuing, Kol shekashur v'talui, okay, that it is attached and it's suspended by this cord from the door. V'rosho echad magia la'aretz, okay, and we're saying that one of the ends actually reaches down to the ground, okay? Now, what does it mean, reach down to the ground? Okay, that just that it's touching the ground, or that it's actually still attached to the rope, but it lies flat with the ground. Let's see if the Gemara or the Mishnah deals with it. The Braita discusses. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Ze af b'medina mutar. According to Rabbi Yehuda, this also would be permitted in the countryside. Ela ezehu neger shenoalin b'mikdash v'lo b'medina. But what kind of a bolt then is it that one can lock in the temple precinct, but not in the countryside? Kol she'eno lo kashur v'lo talui, is one where it is not attached by a rope to the door, or it is not suspended from the door. Okay, so the Gemara wants us then to say, Vishom, adding to what Rabbi Yehuda said, right? Right? Vishom to umanicho bekeren zavi, namely one removes this bolt and places it in a corner of the house. Okay? In other words, if it's a bar that goes across the back of the door, then it has to be lifted out and put down aside. Okay? It's simply a bolt. Again, it could be something that gets stuck into a lock in the door, but then removed and again placed, say, in the corner of the house. Okay? Now, further, Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, in the name of Shmuel, Halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda b'negrar, that the law follows the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, okay, in this case, right, the view in terms of the bolt that drags. Amar Rava, and Rav is now going to raise a statement, Vahu shekashur badelet, but it must be attached, in other words, to the door somehow. Okay. Aini, is that really the case? Asks the Gemara. Vaha Rabbi Tavla ikla lemechoza. But we again try to cite a story, the situation with Rabbi Tavla, who came to the city of Mechoza. V'chaza lahahu, and he saw a certain person, Okay. In this case, actually, we saw a certain bolt, dahavatale beivre dedasha, and he saw that the bolt was attached to the side of the door. Okay. Velo amar laho velo midi, and he never said anything to them. In other words, he didn't tell them that this bolt, okay, was asur. So the Gemara continues and answers, Hahu, this particular bolt, nital beigdo hava, that it was actually suspended, okay, and therefore it could be picked up by its rope, by its cord. That's how, okay, to be used. Bara, okay, and then another statement, okay, this time another incident. Rav Avia, Ikla Nahada. Rav Avia happened to come to Nahardea. Chazia la'ahu gavra, dahavika katir begame. In this case, he saw a certain person that actually tied the bolt to the door using a piece of reed. Amar, he says, din lo nitrok. Okay, that door is not locked. Okay, in other words, that's not sufficient. Okay, so here we see he did respond, and therefore gave an example that it was not adequate. Now, Gemara wants to continue and tell us another situation, this time by means of a question. Okay, said as follows. Okay. By Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera asks the following: Nikmaz. Okay, we translate nikmaz as the bolt is pressed into the ground. Okay, right? In other words, it goes through the threshold into the ground underneath it. Art Scroll does not give us a picture. Koren does. Think of it like a doorstop where you have it's attached to the back of the door, and you loosen it, and then the bolt drops down into a hole, let's say, in the threshold, okay, into the ground. Right? That's the best example I could give, that it falls off a hook and into the ground through the threshold. Amar Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef tries to respond, okay, to Rabbi Zera's question. Mai tibaile, what's bothering him? Lo shamiale hadetanya, didn't he learn or hear that which was taught, namely nishmat, okay, that if it's detached, okay, asur, that it's forbidden to use. Nikmaz, if it's pressed, mutar, that it is permitted. The Rabbi Yehuda Amar, and Rabbi Yehuda himself said, Nikmaz, that if it's pressed, afal pi she'eino nishma, so long as it is not detached. Asur, that's forbidden. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. But Rav Yehuda said, the Amora Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda b'nikmaz, that the law is like Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana, in regards to this pressed kind of bolt. V'tama mai, and the reasoning is why. Amar Abai, says Abai, mishum demichaze kibone. Why? Because if it's not attached and you have to pick it and put it in to something, it's similar to the issue of boner.
Rabbi Green, we never
Yes.
got an explanation of why the drag. What was wrong with a bolt that's dragged on the floor? That's no malaka to drag something on the floor.
Question is whether it is attached to the door by a rope. Then, right? So then
Yeah, okay, so,
you use the rope, you pull it up, and you put it in. But if it's simply considered a separate item, okay, and you're putting it in, the concern is Abai is saying that this may be over on boner, on something like building. Okay,
okay, here, but in the first case too with
yes.
the, yeah, okay, thank
Okay.
you.
We're going to see that that the Gemara goes into this in a little bit more detail. Okay. Remember, I said that we're talking about the example I tried to give is something that's um, you sometimes see it on gates. People
Right,
use it on a gate, right?
that bolt that goes into the floor.
Right. That it's a bolt, that it's attached. You know, you flip it and it's up.
Right,
You unflip
slides
it,
into the
so to
floor.
speak, and it slides down into
Right,
the ground.
yeah,
Okay. That's the best example that I could come up with as a,
okay. And that resembles boner, okay.
okay. In other words, if it's not attached to the gate itself or to the door
Right,
itself, that seems to be the concern. Okay? So we now get another inquiry. Okay, another question. Okay, by mine Rav Nechumi bar Zechariah. Okay, he asks again, me Abai from Abai. Asalo bait yad mahu. What happens if there is an attachment to this bolt that's a handle? Okay, what's the status? Amarle, he said to him, Buchna ka'amrat. He says, there it's more like a pestle. Okay, it resembles a pestle. It's got a piece, and then you've got the bolt itself. Right? Itmar. And on this, the following was said, right? Namely, Amar Rav Nechumi Bar Ada. Okay, Rav Nechumi Bar Ada says, Asalo Beit Yad Mutar. That if a handle was put on this bolt, then it is permitted to be used. Right? Because in this case, it's like the example we had of a knob. Okay, and in that we said that was permitted. Okay, now we get to a new example, a whole new case. Hahu Sharita. This is a cross beam. Okay, think of I'm sure we've seen it in movies or things like that, old-fashioned doors where they had like L pieces sticking out from the back of the door, and you needed a piece of wood to fit into that across there to block the door, right? Think of that image, right? Okay. So he says, Hahu Sharita, this crossbeam, Dahavu Be Rabbi Padat, that was in the house of Rabbi Padat. It must have been heavy because it says, the Gemara, Dahava Midlula Be Asara, that it took 10 people, okay, to lift it and to put it into place, okay? Vishadu La Adisha. And then they would place it onto the back of the door. Velo amar laho velo mide. And Rav Padat never challenged them that this was an improper kind of locking the door. Amar, Torat Klialeha. He says that this is considered a kind of utensil, okay? And therefore, since this beam was large enough for actually people to sit on it, okay, and not just used for locking the door, he considered it a utensil and permissible to be used on Shabbat. Okay. Now, right, what happens? Right? Let's go on here. Hahu, right? All right, so we now get to another example. Hahu asita. We have this large, I'm going to call an asita a mortar, like a huge bowl. Okay, think of it like almost like a cement planter. Okay, that's the best example I can think of. A large bowl like that. Okay, Dahava Be Mar Shmuel. And this was in the house of the master Shmuel. Dahava Mechazeket Adariva. Okay, that this bowl, okay, was such large enough that it could hold a measure known as a deriva. This was a huge measure. Okay, it could hold 15 seah, right? Shara Mar Shmuel, the Mishdaye Adasha. And the Mar Shmuel permitted them to move this and put this up against the door, use it as a way of closing the door. Amar Torat Kli Aleh. Why? Because he said again, it had the status of a utensil and therefore it could be moved on Shabbat. Okay, now we're going to move literally to a different type of situation, a whole new subject. Okay, in this case, okay, we see it again based initially on a story. Shalach le Rami bar Yecheskel the Rav Amram. Rami bar Yecheskel sent, we're going to assume for a moment, either a shaila or a request for a shiur, a written shiur, okay, to Rav Amram. And he said in this request, Nemalan mar, that the masters tell us, Mahalan mile ma'alaita, some very significant, important lesson, Da amrat lan mishmei de Rav Asi, bekife da arba. Okay, that was told by, in the name of Rav Asi, in regards to the arches that are attached to a boat. Okay, now if you look at the picture on 102A2, opposite note 18, ArtScroll gives us a relatively good picture here, okay, in terms of the fact, okay, Cora and I have to tell you is a little better picture, okay, but it gives us the sense of we have a boat, okay, that was used, okay, and we have these metal arches that extend, okay, on the boat. Those arches are within a certain distance. And what happens is that during the rain or cold weather, they would throw mats or they would throw cloths on top of the arches to protect either the persons or to protect materials that they were carrying in the boat. Okay, so that is the issue. And so now this is what he sends him back. Shalach lehachi, right? He sent him back the following regarding these arches, all right? Amar Rav Asi, he says, Rav Asi, Hani kife da arba, these arches of the boat, Bisman sheyesh bahen tefach, so long as that the distance between the, right, that the have the thickness of the arch itself is 1 tefach, okay? Inami, or it's also ein bahem tefach, even if the arches themselves aren't a tefach wide, ve'ein bein zeh lezeh shlosha, but the distance between one arch and another is no more than 3 tfachim, lemachar, the next day, in other words, implying on Shabbat, mevi machatzelet, upareis alehem, they can bring a mat and spread it over the arches. Mai tama, what's the reasoning? mosif al ohel arihu. Because in this case, once he puts it on the arch already on Friday, okay, he's not doing it lechatchila, okay? He's adding simply to an existing temporary covering, okay? Vishapir dami, he says, and this seems clearly appropriate, right? It seems permitted. Now, Gemara picks up, Hanhu, these tikare dahave lead Rav Huna. Okay, so we have another situation. We have a certain situation here where we have animals, okay, that belong to Rav Huna. They happen to be rams, and there's something particular here, right? And Rav Huna was concerned that the biyamama during the day, ba'u tula, these rams need shade. Ubalayla, ba'u avira. And at night, the rams need to be out in the air. Okay. So what is he going to do on Shabbat? Atalakame de Rav. He came before Rav to ask a Shaila what to do. Amarle, and Rav told him as follows: Zil karoch budye. He says, roll up the mats and go and put them on top, okay? V'shiyer ba tefach, and leave a handbreadth, a tefach out of the mat. In other words, roll it up, but not totally in a ball, but a little bit left over. L'macha, the next day, pashta, mosif al ohel arai. The next day, you can unroll it, right? And when you unroll it then, okay, what happens is the result is you're simply adding to a temporary structure, okay? And that, right, the shapir dami, and that seems to be permitted. Okay. Now, we're going on with another situation. Okay. Okay. Amar Rav says, Rav Mishum Rabbi Chia. Let's say we have a vilon, we have a sheet, a curtain. Okay. Mutar lintoto, mutar leforko b'Shabbat. He says it's permitted to suspend it or to hang it, okay, or also to take it down on Shabbat. Let's take another example. Kilat chatanim. Okay, we have a bridal canopy. Now, this is not the chuppah we're talking about. We're talking about here about the bed. Okay, think of what do you call it over a bed? You know, right? Some people have what do
Well,
you
the canopy bed.
canopy. All right, excuse canopy. Thanks, Bob. Okay, they have a canopy on their bed. Okay, I know of couples that would take the chuppah, if they had their personal chuppah, and use that as the canopy for their bed. Okay, on a four-poster bed. Right? Kilat chatanim, mutar leforko, ulatota b'Shabbat. It's permitted to suspend it, to put it up, or to take it down on Shabbat. However, there are conditions. Okay. Amar Rav Sheshet, Berei de Rav Idi. He says as follows, what's the qualifications? Lo amran ein begaga tefach. That's so long as that I'm going to say the horizontal part, okay, is no more than a tefach. Aval yesh begaga tefach, but if the flat part, okay, is of the horizontal width of at least a tefach or more, asur, it's forbidden. וכי אין בגגה טפח, לא אמרן, אלא שאין בפחות משלושה סמוך לגג טפח. And here we even make a further qualification, okay? That this is only, so we say this, only that I'm going to call it the peak of this canopy, okay, is such that the distance from the top of the peak to the further down, okay, is not 3 tfachim, okay, and that the width of the peak where they meet, okay, is less than 1 tefach. And you look at the diagram opposite note 22 on 102A3, and you see the diagram showing us those measurements. Okay. Now here we're not talking about a 4-poster bed. We're talking only about a 2-poster bed, okay, that has the posts in the middle with a cross beam on top. So it is more like I'm going to call it a V shape, reverse V shape, and not considered to be a tent, where the tent would have more of a flat horizontal roof. Okay. Aval yesh bepachot mishlosha samuch legag, but where we say it's less than 3 tfachim near the peak, right? Samuch legag tefach, where that is where it's 1. The peak measures across, or tefach, asur. That would be forbidden. Chi ein b'pachot mishlosha samuch legag tefach, nami lo amran, ela she'ein b'shipu'ah tefach. And again, a further clarification, okay, that at this peak, okay, where it meets, right, we say this only a situation where the incline, okay, is less than a handbreadth. Right? Aval yesh b'shipu'ah tefach, okay, but if that incline of the reverse V, okay, is more than a tefach, shipuye ohalim ke ohalim damu. Then we say that it is considered more like a canopy, and therefore a canopy is considered more like a tent, and that's the prohibited. Okay, having said that, okay, we're going to come back to yes, go ahead. No question? Okay. All right. Remember we saw that they were permitting adding to a temporary ohel. So we pick up on that element. Okay. And I want those gentlemen, I'm thinking particularly of you, Marvin. Okay. When you wear, or others who, let's say, have a large black hat with a wide brim, should find this next piece of Gemara interesting. Right? Ba'amar Rav Shisha Berei de Rav Idi. Says Rav Shisha in the name of Rav Idi. Saina Shari, a stiff felt hat is permitted. Vahatanya, says the Gemara. But aren't we taught the following in the Braita? Asur, that it's prohibited. Lo kasha. There's no problem really here. Ha da'it be tefach, ha dalit be tefach. Okay? Here, and we're saying that the brim is question of how wide the brim is. If the brim is a tefach, okay, or if the brim is not a tefach. Okay? If it's not a tefach, it's not considered like an ohel. If it is a tefach or more, then it's considered like an ohel. Ela me'ata. But rather from here, okay, what happens? Sheraviv beglime tefach. From this, though, okay, we might raise the following situation. Let's say a person pulls his cloak, okay, his garment, right, over his head, right, and he extends it more than a tefach over his head, right? What's the situation? Hachanami de asur. Here, this would also seem to be prohibited. Ela lo kasha. Rather, that's not prohibited. Ha the mehadek, ha the lo mehadek. Here we're talking about the situation of whether it fits snugly, okay, or if it doesn't fit snugly. Okay, if it doesn't fit snugly, okay, then there is a concern that it might come off and the person might pick it up and carry it in the Rishus Harabim. Okay?
So from the previous case with the hat, you're saying that if my brim is wider than that tefach, it's a walking oil?
All I'm saying is that it's an interesting piece of Gemara.
Interesting.
Okay. Machzirin tzir. We're back to doors again. All right. Says our Mishnah. Okay. Let's assume we have a door now, could be just to something else other than a actual entrance to a house or a gate. Okay. We could have a door, let's say, on a closet, or door on a cupboard, or a door on a crate, okay, a large box, okay, right? So the Gemara Mishnah starts, Machzirin Sir, okay, and let's say this closet or this cupboard, okay, normally it would have two hinges. Okay, so the Mishnah tells us, Machzirin sir hatachton b'mikdash. We can put back, in other words, we can reinsert if the pin, okay, in that hinge comes out, we can reinsert it in the temple precinct of Alo b'Medina, but not in the countryside. V'ha'elyon, and in terms of the pin in the upper hinge, okay, kan v'kan asur, both in the temple precinct and in the countryside, it's prohibited. Okay, if we look at a hinge today, okay, you can still see that it's basically pieces attached to the door, attached to the frame, and there is a pin going through it. Okay. Rav Yehuda Omer, ha'elyon b'mikdash, v'hatachton b'medina. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, saying that one can return the upper one also in the temple precinct, and one may return the lower one only in the countryside. Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, says a Braita, Tzir Delet, talking about the hinge for a door, or Sheda, the hinge, let's say on some sort of a carriage, Teva, or some sort of a box, Umigdal, or some sort of a cupboard. B'mikdash, Machzirin, says the Braita, in the temple precinct, we can return the pin. B'medina, dochakin, but in the countryside, we can only push it back. If it comes out, we can't return it. V'ha'elyon, and the upper hinge, kan v'kan lo yachzir, both in the countryside or in the temple, we can't return it. Why? Gezerah shema yitka. Right? We say that there is a gezerah, a decree, lest one bang it forcefully. Okay? Because what would happen? That would be perhaps like bona. Ve'im taka chayav chatat. And if they do bang it forcefully, right, he would be chayav echatas. Now we continue. Let's say we have hinges for something else, a cover for a bore, v'sheldot, v'shel yitzia. In this case, we now have a covering for a pit or for a cistern or some other extension, doorway. Okay? Lo yachzir, one cannot put the pin back. Ve'im hichzir chayav chatat. And if one does put the pin back in to the hinge, again, he is chayav chatas. Okay, because again, it would seem then that it could be bona, but clearly it is an isur. It's bona, according to Rashi at least, and it's again isur. Isur doraita. Okay, new Mishnah. Let's pick up. Machzirin ritiya b'mikdash. Okay. What's ritiya? Okay. I'm going to explain ritiya the following. We would normally call it a bandage. Art Scroll translates it as a dressing. Okay. The implication being that they would put salve on a wound and then cover it with some sort of a cloth, right? So that's how we need to understand this word ritiya. So one can put back a dressing or a bandage in the temple precinct, b'mikdash, avalo b'medina, but not in the countryside. Im betchila, but if they were to do a bandage or dressing initially, kan v'kan asur, says the Mishnah. Both in the temple precinct and in the countryside, it's forbidden. Gemara, a new Braita, Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita, Ritiya sheparsha me'al gabe makkah. Say you have this bandage or a dressing that somehow it came off, it fell off the wound. Machzirin b'Shabbat, says the Braita. It's permissible to put it back on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda Amer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Huchleka lamata, if it slipped down below, dochka lamala, you can push it back up. Lamala, if it slipped back up, dochka lamata, you can push it down below. Umigale miktsat ritiya, so long as part of the bandage, the dressing, is visible. Umekaneach pi hamaka hozer umigale miktsat ritiya, and one can actually mekaneach, actually smooth, okay, or wipe part of the surface of the wound on the side. When you move the bandage, you sort of smooth part of it, move the other part of the bandage, smooth the other part. Umekaneach pi hamaka. Okay, uritiya atzma lo yikaneach mepnei shehu memareach. Okay, but the bandage itself, one cannot, so to speak, wipe. Why? Because that is an act of smoothing, and that again would be an isur d'oraita. Ve'im merach chayav chatat. And if one did smooth it, why? Because one would be spreading something, perhaps ointment or something, that is clearly isur d'oraita and forbidden. Now, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda. The law is like Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rav Chisda, lo shanu ela shepirsha al gabe kli. Rav Chisda is limiting, qualifying. This only applies, he says, if the bandage actually, they taught it, if the bandage actually fell on some utensil. Aval pirsha al gabe karka. Okay, if he says here that if it actually fell onto the ground, divrei hakol asur. Everybody is in agreement that it is then forbidden to replace the bandage or the dressing. Amama Rav Ashi. Mar, son of Rav Ashi, says, Hava ka'aminna kame abba. He says, I was once standing before my father, Rav Ashi, naflale avi sadya, and a bandage that he had on him fell off and landed on the pillow. V'kama haderle, and he put it back on. Aminale, and I said to him, Lo savar lamar, doesn't the master hold the opinion? Lahada amar Rav Chisda, to that which was the view of Rav Chisda, machloket shepirsha al gabe kli, that there is this disagreement whether the dressing fell onto a utensil, aval pirsha al gabe karka asur, but that if it fell on the ground, it's prohibited. Va'amar Shmuel, and the Shmuel says, halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda, that the law is actually like Rabbi Yehuda. Amarli, Rav Ashi responded to his son, Lo shami'ali, I did not hear this. Klomar, lo severely. What understood to mean, I didn't hold that opinion. Okay? Now, that gives us a new Mishnah to look at. Okay? Now, in order to understand this Mishnah, I'm going to show you a picture. Okay, hopefully you can see this. I'm showing it up to the camera. Okay, this is a lyre, L-Y-R-E, biblical instrument. Okay, Art Scroll does not give us a picture. All right, so I'm providing one. Notice, okay, it has strings from the top down and attached to the bottom. Okay, won't call it a banjo, a guitar, but it is a kind of like in the harp family. And who played these? The Leviim. So what happens if all of a sudden on Shabbos, the strings of a Levi's harp, a lyre, break? What does he do? Mishnah, koshrin nima b'mikdash. Says the Mishnah, we can tie the string, okay, of the musical instrument of the Levi in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple precinct. Aval lo b'medina, but not in the countryside. Ve'im betchila, but initially, in other words, to tie it lechatchila on Shabbat, kan v'kan asur. Both in the temple precinct and outside, it is prohibited. Gemara says, Urminhu, but we have a contradiction here. Nimat kinor, okay, the string of a kinor. Okay, we all know kinor David Hamelech, right? The lyre of King David, right? Shenifsaka, that breaks. V'lo haya koshra ela onva. He's not permitted to tie it again, but ela onva, to sort of make it into a bow. Lo kasha, it's not a problem. Ha Rabbanan, one is the view of the rabbis, Vaha Rabbi Eliezer, the other the view of Rabbi Eliezer. The Rabbi Eliezer de Amar, why? Because Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says, Machshirei mitzvah dochinet hashabbat. Okay, that the utensils used to fulfill a mitzvah, right? They, if you want to say, are doche, they should be allowed, okay, for the Shabbat. Koshra, to tie it, the Rabbanan, as far as the rabbis, the Amrei ein dochin, okay, they say it doesn't put off Shabbat. Onva, one must make it into a bow. I Rabbi Eliezer, afilu lechatchila nami. If we hold like the view of Rabbi Eliezer, then it would appear that even initially a Levi could tie the string on Shabbat, ela lo kasha. But rather, again, here's a different suggested answer. Ha Rabbi Yehuda v'ha Rabbanan. One is the view of Rabbi Yehuda, okay, who basically says there's no distinction between bows and knots, v'ha Rabbanan, okay, and the other is the view of the rabbis, okay. The Rabbi Yehuda, aliba daman, and Rabbi Yehuda follows whose opinion? Okay, just roll over a tiny bit. I aliba the Rabbi Eliezer ka'amar. If he's talking like the view of Rabbi Eliezer, afilu lechatchila nami, then again, he should be able to do it the very first time initially. Ela lo kasha. But again, we say here, one more case, there is no problem. Ha Rabbi Shimon, ha Rabbanan. Okay, here in what case it's the view of Rabbi Shimon, the other the case of the rabbis. All right, the Tanya, as was taught in a Braita, Ben Levi shenifsaka lo nima b'kinor, a Levite whose harp string broke, koshra may tie it. Rabbi Shimon Omer onva. Rabbi Shimon says he may make it a bow, but not a regular knot. And what happens? Okay, one more statement. Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer Omer afhi hina mishmat et kol ela mishlosha milamata. That part we'll pick up tomorrow, okay, with what Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer is saying. Okay, so we'll stop right there and finish up that particular Mishnah tomorrow. Okay, everybody have a good day. Stay well. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay? A reminder that the Siyum is Zoomed.